Hello, everyone. Megan here from Romance by the Book with the lovely Marielle.
Hello.
And this is our final week for April, reading The Wolf and the Wildflower by Stacy Reid. And it's about to go down, y'all.
This book, like the thirds, I'll end on like a hot spot, I think, in the
Yeah,
book.
for sure. So, she walks out of the ballroom after he leaves, after they've danced in front of everyone, and everyone is like agog because nobody knows who she is, and he hasn't, of course, touched anybody else.
Well, and they
Ja-
didn't talk to anyone after, right? Like
Yeah, no,
he
they just
immediately
dipped.
leaves.
Yeah. So James is waiting for her at the treehouse. He helps her out of her dress and everything so she can like safely climb up the ladder. And he has lit candles and it's all very romantic and sweet.
She
Um,
says, "I've made it soft for you," because
yeah.
he like before it was pretty kind of sparse,
Yeah.
and that's so sweet. Also, how did he know she was coming?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like he can read her pretty well by now, but yeah.
He does. I was like, holy smokes, he was prepared.
Yes, for sure. And so they, of course, have sex, and it is honestly gorgeous. Like, it's hot, it's emotional, it is wonderful. Like, I loved everything about it.
Yeah.
Um, and afterward, he asks if she ever wants to live as a woman, and she says no, just like immediately no. And then she kind of explains how she would lose everything that she's worked for if she does.
So, like,
Because
she has
they,
spent time in university,
yeah,
she graduated and is working
has
in a
been
field.
working.
Is she
Mhm.
really like, clearly she has a passion for and is really
Yeah,
interested in the work that she's doing, aside from, like, James himself.
right. Yeah.
Um, and like, also her relationship with her dad is she doesn't explain this, but, like, clearly it is what it is because
Right.
she is
Because
living
she's
with
hiding.
him.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and because and it's also never gonna be more than it is because she's hiding, but she has to take what she can get, basically. And so he asks her, like, how this whole situation all started. And so she tells him about her mom and, everything that happened. Um, and it's a very big bonding moment for them.
Mhm.
So the next day, everybody in the house goes to church, and so that's all the party guests, everybody who's like still at the house, all goes to church, and everyone is kind of staring at him, like, especially because these are other people in the town who like weren't necessarily at the party the night before and like don't really know what to expect of him. Um, and meanwhile, Jules is just trying not to blush the whole day, thinking about their night before. Um,
Yeah, and also he's now in this spot where he's, like, that like, front and center because he's the highest ranked person in the
right,
town, and they've gone to church, so it's like an enclosed space.
yeah,
It's, like, all and surrounded by people. It's a lot of
we're
things that
all
he's
staring
not
at him,
comfortable with.
like.
Yeah.
Yeah. So after the service, he tells his mom he's gonna walk home because he needs to be outside. Like that
Mhm.
was too
Like,
too
getting in a
tight.
carriage after that was
Yeah.
not gonna
No. And she's like, "It'll take hours." And he's like, "Okay."
Yep.
Like, and like that's yeah. So
N
of course,
he's like, "That's a feature, not a bug."
right,
Like, we're
exactly.
fine.
We're good. So Jules tags along. And his friend Linfield.
I kind of wanna say just pause because there's been up to this point a few times where Jules's dad has warned, like, "Watch out because you cannot be friends and
Right.
you can't be, like,
Right, like, we're from a different social
chummy."
strata, like, beyond this, you're not gonna, like, hang out
But,
with
like,
him.
they are clearly like, they're just inseparable. It's kind of
Yeah,
interesting
it's
that,
it's
it's, like, not even really a question of,
yeah,
like, if I'm going and you're gonna come, right? Yes,
right.
let's go.
And to continue that thread, Linfield, his friend, has invited James for a night about town in London, and he wants Jules to come,
Yeah.
and she says she will.
He has not told the Duchess,
No.
and that's a thing where Jules is like, "Isn't this house party going on for a few?" And
Right.
James is kinda like, "Uh-huh,
Well, she
but
said
I'm
something
not
like,
gonna
"Didn't
be
you check
here."
with your mother?" And he's like, "Oh, I should run all my plans by my mother?" And she's like, "Oh, no?" I guess no, but also she probably thinks so.
But people are so worried about him, like, being the Duke, and he's just like, "I
He
do
is
what I want,"
so
and it's
very
like,
clearly the
he
Duke. Yeah.
yeah. But anyway, yes,
It's funny.
he's just like, "I will tell her before we
Yeah,
leave."
I'll tell her that we're leaving. So they start making out in the woods and they end up having sex up against a tree and it is hot.
Mhm.
And afterward he tells her that it's near the anniversary of his dad's death and he doesn't really feel anything about it and he doesn't love that he doesn't really feel anything about it, like it makes him feel bad. Um and she kind of explains how he severed the link to his emotions for his survival and it's just going to take time for that
Yeah,
to come back. Like that's not he doesn't need to feel guilty about it. He did it to live and he lived and slowly but surely, he'll figure it out basically. Um and he says that he's like, "Well, I can feel though. I can feel things, but all of it seems to be centered around you." And
yeah,
she kind of hates that she loves that. I think that's pretty much a way to
yeah,
describe her response to
mhm,
that.
yeah.
Yeah, she hates that she
She's
loves
kind
him.
of like, "Is this healthy?" But also
Yay. And the sad thing is the subtext here is that they both know there's no future for them, but they both wish it could be different. And so later that night, he goes to tell his mom about leaving, and she is less than pleased, of course. They discuss his dad a bit, and he kind of holds her hand for a moment when she gets emotional, and it's the first time that he's like initiated touching her, which clearly moves her.
yeah.
Um,
And
and
it's like she doesn't know what to do
yeah,
because, like, there's excitement, but also, like, she doesn't want it's like she's just like, "What?"
yeah.
And
And as
he
he's
then
headed,
is like, "Don't make
yeah.
me," kinda
And
like
as he's headed back out into the woods, she kind of reminds him, like, no wife is going to accept you sleeping in the woods and like not eating dinner at the table. Like you're going to have to give this up. And he doesn't say anything. He just walks away.
yeah.
And so,
I mean, and then I as a reader, I'm like, "I know one wife would be perfectly fine." This
exactly. Who's out there with him right now sleeping after they were together. Yeah. So, Linfield takes them out drinking in London and then he takes them to a brothel. Rut row is what I wrote in my notes.
yeah,
So
yeah.
they get led up to like a private room and Jules is kind of there's
So,
one woman
like
in
a
there.
private room, but it's like
It's like adjoining private rooms.
and it's very much like, "Oh, I know the perfect people for all of you,"
Right.
um,
Well, and so
and
far there's only one woman in there with them and she is clearly into Linfield. Like they start making out and like she's,
but the
getting it.
lady who's, like, in charge of the thing was also,
Yeah.
like, eyeing James, and
Yeah.
James is very like, "Oh, no, like, mm-mm, no
Yeah.
touchy." But
No
she was
touchy.
like,
Yeah.
"If you want," and then anyway, and
Yeah.
she was like,
So
"I know
they're
someone who would like you, like Jules, but, would like a slight boy like like you," and
right.
Jules is kinda like, "This is ugh."
This is a nightmare. Yeah. So they so
Like, on all fronts, because she is not loving, like, this lady being clearly, like, eyeballing him,
yeah.
but also she's
And the
like,
idea
"Please
that he
don't put
might
me in a room with some." Like, she doesn't want
yeah,
him in a room with somebody, he does she's like, "How am I
she doesn't
supposed to
want to be either.
explain?" Like,
Yeah.
it just is too many bad just a
So the
bad
woman in
idea.
there starts like going down on Linfield and they're like in their own little world. And Jules kind of asks if James is going to join them. And he says something like, if I do. And she's like, oh, I guess I will too. And then he walks up close to her. So they're like chatting closely, quietly. And she's like, well, I will too, of course. Like, I'm sure I can find a dress in this place. I wonder if he'll even notice that and nope. He hauls them into the adjoining room and says, "Should the Marquis or any other man touch you, I would break them to pieces." And I was like, "Whew, yes, please."
This is the kind of fictional, like, conversation that I
Yes.
am like, "I should not like this, and yet."
And yet it is hot. So they both agree like to exclusivity basically while they're
Yeah.
together.
I guess it's
Um,
also one of those, like, in real life would be scary, but in a book, I'm like,
You're like, "Don't I love it."
This is so funny.
And so but they're both scared about how attached they are to each other,
Yeah.
knowing that they don't have a future, and it's scary. And so they have some hot sex, and they decide to go ahead and head back to the house because they figure Linfield won't even notice.
They left, yeah,
Um,
they did all their I there's been a couple times in this book, this is one of them where I was kind of like
is somebody gonna see
expecting
this?
for something, like someone to show up or somebody
Yeah.
to, but no, they were
Um,
like they
well,
were
but
fine.
then they walk out of the room to find the madam standing there, and she says, "I see." And James is like, "Oh, do you see?" Like, and she's like, "Well, I mean, my job requires the height of discretion, or I wouldn't have this job anymore, so don't worry about it," basically. And so he doesn't. So they leave.
And it is kind of funny, like, we never find out what she thinks she saw, but
Yeah. I mean,
okay.
she clearly sees their closeness, and they come out of the room together, and they've clearly just both been, uh
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
I've read
so,
a
I
couple
mean
books where there were peepholes in such establishments or
oh,
things,
right.
so I was like, I'm not sure
Yes.
exactly how far into
Yeah,
things
if
she
that did
saw, but
happen, we do not know about it. Um, so the next night at White's, they are hanging out with the Earl of Summers, which is his friend who had been with him in Canada when he
when he
disappeared.
fell off the
And
cliff.
so he's very emotional at seeing him again, even more so than almost anybody else has been because he was with him when he got lost.
Yeah, and
Um,
he's like, "I looked for you, and I came
mhm.
back and looked for you some more, and
Me and
I
your
am so
dad were out there so
sorry."
many times. Yeah, it was very sweet.
And he was like, "Your dad never never stopped believing and never stopped
Yeah.
hoping that you were out there," which is to me,
Mhm.
such an interesting such an interesting thing to say,
Yeah.
because for James, the hope was so painful that he had to, like, shut that down,
Yeah. He
and
like severed
yet,
it. Yeah.
for his friend and for his dad, like, it
That's
was
all
the
they had.
thing that they held on to, and I just thought it was such an interesting thing, probably not that important to the story, but in my
But yeah,
heart,
no,
I
I
was
agree.
like, "Wow, what a cool, like,
And especially because
juxtaposition to
he's
put on the
feeling some
page
type
for
of
us."
way about his dad not being there and not ever knowing that he was found. And so yeah, I agree. I feel like it was really important to him to hear that. And so meanwhile, Summers starts asking him about who he's gonna marry, and he's like, "There's people are betting, like, give me an inside track, basically." And Jules is, of course, her scent is changing, and he knows that she's pained by this topic, and he kind of tries to like, move on. And so later they're like walking home in the rain again, and she kind of like screaming out her feelings into the night. And so he kind of joins her because I mean they're both in a lot of pain and they know that even more pain is coming, but they can't seem to, I mean, they can't do anything about it. They don't feel like.
Yeah.
And so
And she's like, "It's better to let it out," and so he starts
yeah.
howling into
Well, and
and
he
she
asks her if she regrets them, and she says never. And they kiss in the rain right there, even though they're on the street. But, I mean, they're alone, it's raining, everybody's not outside, but still, it's risky.
Mhm. It's in
Um,
the open. Yeah.
yeah, and at that moment, Jules realizes that she's in love with him and that she's an idiot because, like, this is gonna ruin her life, basically. So, at the house, in bed, he asks if she has ever laughed freely, like, without worrying about her voice and how it sounds and that kinda stuff, and she
Yeah.
hasn't. And so he starts tickling her, and she, like, laughs, and then she
Like a
cries,
peal of laughter, and it's
and
yeah.
it's so emotional, that really made me emotional. Um, and so the next day, of course, they're back at the estate. Um, James is spiraling out. He can't ever imagine being with any other woman besides his Wildflower, but she has no wish to live as a woman, and he doesn't know what the hell he's gonna do. And so he
Well, and
runs.
he doesn't wanna take that her freedoms away from her either.
Yeah.
So
Like,
there's
he understands why she wants that, but he wants her, so it's like an impossible situation.
yeah.
And so he runs out into the woods, and of course, Jules sees him and follows, and he says, "Do not leave, Wildflower, and I won't marry another." And he says, "I know I shouldn't
They have
ask
had a
it."
conversation a while back where he says wolves mate for life, and, like, once they find their love, like, there's not another ever, and so it really did remind me of that when he was
Yes.
like, "I'm not marrying anyone else, like,
Yeah,
this is."
like, there's no way I can marry anyone else. "I know I shouldn't ask it, but I want you as my Duchess Wildflower. Marry me." and she's crying because of course she wants that, but she knows she'll have to give up everything else in her life. And she says, "Why would you ask me this?" And she explains all that she would have to give up. And being a doctor, her dad's practice, and maybe even his love, like her freedom, basically, she would be his property. I mean, and she says, "I cannot marry you." And he asks her if she loves him, and she wants to tell him so badly, but she knows she can't, because if she admits it, he's never going to
She won't.
stop. Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well,
And
also
so,
for her, like, if she says that out loud, how is she ever gonna, like,
yeah.
it's she
And
can't say no. She can't say no to marrying him and be like, "Also, I
and
love
be
you
like, "Also,
forever."
I love
Like,
you." Yeah. So she's distraught. He is very pained, and then she notices when he just like whoop, like shuts it all down like he did in the past. And now she understands it's to protect himself from this pain he's feeling. That's like what he's learned to do. And he just kind of like cold veneer. He says, "Goodbye, Jules Sotheby. I wish you only success in your endeavors." And he walks away.
yeah.
And she sits down and bawls her eyes out. And it was so
It's
sad.
so sad.
Oh.
Yeah.
Um, and she's like, in that moment, she's like, "I'm pretty sure I'm never gonna see him again." Like that, this was it. So she and her dad have left the next day, and James can't sleep. He goes outside into a storm and runs for like an hour and ends up at his father's burial place. There's like
Yeah.
a headstone.
Earlier in the book, and I guess it was during the house party, like the anniversary of his father's death
Right.
occurred, and he walked past that like his grave and saw
Yeah.
like his mom kind of talking to the dad, and he didn't
Right.
stay because he didn't want to intrude on her moment,
Yeah.
but he at that time had said how he felt he felt the loss, but he didn't feel the loss, and it was just kind of, so this is a moment
Yeah.
where it's like he's there, it's storming, he's feeling all the
He's
things.
feeling all the things, and he starts talking to his dad. It's so
Mhm.
emotional. He basically says, like, "You're the only one I wanna talk to, like, so here I am," basically. And he says, "I wanted to do my duty, but, like, I can't live without her. And so even if that means walking away from the dukedom, like, I'm gonna have to because this cannot stand," basically.
Yeah. It's
Um,
really sweet because he's like, "I tried to remember all the things that you taught me,"
yeah.
and, like, he really doesn't wanna let his family down, and it's sweet because even though, like, the way he's
Hmm.
been acting, like, I don't know that his family knew or understand, like,
Right.
just how much he is, like, pulling for, like pulling of himself
Yeah.
to, like, be able to please them and do the thing that they need from him, and
Yeah.
it's kinda sad, but anyway.
Oh my gosh, it's so emotional. Um, so meanwhile, Jules has been home for a couple days. She's fully heartbroken. Her father comes in with a letter from the Duchess saying that the Duke impressed the Queen, and so all that is well, and that the Duchess hopes that he'll be announcing an engagement soon to Lady Amelia. And she's like, can't even muster up any joy at this news, of course. And her father calls her out on it. And he's like, "This like longing is unseemly. Like, what is going on?" You know what I mean? And she starts to sort of say something, and she realizes she cannot say one more like untruth to her father. Like she just
Yeah.
cannot do it. And so she
Well, and her
walks
mom
away.
is kind of, like, in the background. She's not exactly in the same room, but she's, like, kind
Yeah.
of within sight doing something,
Yeah.
and she kind of looks back to her mom, and her mom is just like, "Hey, how's it
She's like,
going?"
"Hi."
She's
Yeah.
just like, "I
And
can't."
she doesn't know what to do, and she can't say anything. So she just walks away. And the maid comes by and hands her a letter, which is from James.
Mhm.
And so I took a screenshot of some of it because I feel like it's really important. Like, it's so romantic. It is the, like, most
I
romantic
I
letter.
I am a sucker for epistolary anything.
Yes. Oh
And
god.
this for me was, like, it's a little bit like if you love persuasion because that letter at the
The
end.
letter.
And I'm
Yeah.
like, for me, I was like, oh, James.
Oh my god, it's so beautiful. So it says, "Dear Wildflower, exiling you from my heart is an impossible hope. More so because I do not want to. You
Yeah.
once told me love bewitched, it healed, it was passionate, and it was what our souls longed for. At the time, I thought you a fanciful fool, but now I know the truth of those words because this is the love I feel for you." Ah! It was indeed wretched of me to ask you to give up a passion and dream that your eyes sparkle with when you speak about it. I tell myself I can live without you because I love you enough to hope only a happy, fulfilled life for you. I deluded myself. It has only been a couple of days, but I know you will haunt me forever. You are like a thief in the night, entering my dreams and stealing my peace. I have seen the unsounded depths in your soul, and I hope you have seen mine. It is only you I love, and I am willing to live with you always in your disguise.
He is like, I will give you 2 days to read. He's kind of like, I know you're gonna rage, I know you're gonna deny, I know you're gonna like all the things you're gonna do. I'm giving you 2 days and I'm coming for you.
Yeah. Read
And
this letter, cry your denial, rage, and laugh, and then know that I'm coming for you. And it
it's
is perfection. I was like, "Sir."
yes.
Like,
Like,
wowzers. Oh, she
would
is
you not have just been like, bring me a trunk, I'm packing my bags. But
right now.
she does something different.
Yeah, well, so she's shook by this letter because the idea that he's willing to live with her in her disguise as a man, regardless of what people will say, regardless of what people will think is happening behind closed doors, like, he does
Well,
not care.
and he's got a cousin who was like
Like, the heir
expecting to
apparent.
be the yeah.
Yeah.
And so he's just like, who cares? Like there's
He'll continue to be the heir and, like, who cares? Yeah. And she kind of looks out the window at her dad and imagines giving up her plans and feels surprisingly easy about it. And she's like, "Okay, that's it." And she's like, "I can't live with him as a man, but I'm also scared of living with him as a woman." Because not just a woman, but a duchess, which is a whole other thing that she's never even considered.
yeah.
But she knows that she can't live without him no matter what, so that's it. Her mom walks in and sees her crying, and she says to her mom, "Jules Sotheby can no longer exist, mama." And of course, her mom starts, "I need time. I need a few more months at least, whatever." And she says, "I'll leave it up to you how and when
I
you're gonna tell him, but like in 2
when
days,
her
Jules Sotheby is dead, basically."
when her mother said, I just need a couple more months, I was like, and
And
23
23
years?
years.
What? Like
Yeah.
what?
Hard pass on that. Yeah, but she says to her, like, "You get to decide how and when to tell dad, but in 2 days when I leave this house, Jules Sotheby's dead. He will no longer exist." So, James, meanwhile, sees a small announcement in the paper of Jules dying in a carriage accident, and he is
Devastated.
destroyed. I
I
mean,
mean,
destroyed. He can't help but air his despair in front of his mom and sister. And he calls Jules "she" while
yeah.
he's
He's
talking.
not even trying to, but he's just
Yeah,
like, I
and his mother
cannot live without
realizes
her.
that that is who he danced with at the ball, and, um, she can tell, of course, that he's distraught, but she's like, "The ball is in a couple of hours, like, you can't I'm sorry, but, like, you have to be there, like, this plan has to continue." Like
He's kinda like, "The queen already people are gonna be there because the queen already approved you. Everyone's
right.
gonna be you can't not show up." And his sister is like, "Excuse me?" Like, "What?"
Right, like, clearly you can see that this is not a good time, you know what I mean? But his mom is like, "I'm sorry, but, like, you have to." So, at the ball, he's just like, he's there, but he's not there. And his butler comes over and says a woman is insisting on being let in without an invitation, which his mom was very clear was not to happen.
You know what was the funniest part to me was that the butler was like, "She's a little, like, scary, like, she's kind of aggressive." And,
She's very firm in her opinions or whatever.
James is
Yeah,
like,
it was funny.
"What was that? What was her name?"
Uh-huh, Miss Juliana Sotheby, cousin of Jules, supposedly. So he says, "Let her inside." And so when she walks in, he can't look away from her. He literally drops the glass he's holding.
Mhm.
She feels horrible because he says to her, like, "You're alive," or something like that. And she's like, "Oh God, no. Like, I never meant for you to read that. That was like to settle my work, self so that people knew that I was dead and wouldn't wonder. Like, that
Well,
was
and it was
never
like
meant
a
for you to read."
tiny thing, in
Right.
and
Like,
he and put it in very specific, like, news outlets. It wasn't
Yeah.
like it was the front page of a
And she came
major.
there as fast as she could to hopefully avoid him seeing that, but unfortunately, that's what happened. And and of course, he knows what her being there dressed as a woman means, and he can't believe it because he said it was fine. She didn't have to do this, you know? And she's like, "No, I love you and we'll figure it out." And so he starts dancing with her even though the band is not playing and nobody else is dancing. And so the band quickly
Band just
like
like
starts
starts.
picking up the waltz
I'm like, what kind
and
of dance is this? Okay, let's do it.
and everyone is staring, of course. Um he asks her to marry him and she agrees. It's very lovely. And that moment is just like I can picture it in my head, that like dancing alone and everyone staring at them. It's like perfect.
Yeah, that's really cute.
And so a few days later, she meets with her mom and dad, and her mom had told him the day before, but it's of course still a shock to him to see her, dressed as a woman.
Yeah.
Um, and he's like, "Now I understand everything I observed between you and the Duke. Like you were
Mhm.
literally falling in love." And she tells them that they are marrying, and and honestly, this whole moment is like everything she could have hoped for when when she thought about revealing the truth to her dad and what might happen. This is like everything she could have hoped for,
Yeah.
basically.
The mom, I was like, "What?" Because she was like, "Oh, a duchess," and I'm just like, "Lady, you need to." I
No.
w I had not forgiven her yet. I'm like, "You can't start acting like
Oh my
Elizabeth Bennet's
gosh.
mama when you've been like a."
Yeah, that was wild. So then it's not called an epilogue, but it basically is an epilogue. It's over a year later. Jules is running through the house calling for James. Her research paper was accepted for publication, and it's about the biological necessity for touch and its importance, like from infancy in humans. And she sees him outside and she climbs out the window and and he of course knows she's coming and he says they should spend the night in the treehouse and she agrees. um, and they kind of walk out there, and she thinks to herself it might not be safe for her to climb the rope ladder soon because she's pretty sure she's pregnant. Um, and they kiss, and that's the end. It's very magical little moment. And she kind of mentions in there too, like, the servants, nobody talks about them, like their servants, appreciate them, and nobody's talking about them gallivanting off in the woods and sleeping in the treehouse to anybody or anything like that. So that's good. But they are actually publishing that article under, like, her name,
Juliana, under
uh,
Juliana, that's the.
Juliana, oh, I forget what their last name is, but yeah, Duchess of Wolverton, whatever. Um, so yeah, it was really sweet ending, and so it just kind of encapsulated in that short, like, whatever, 3 paragraphs or whatever it was, like, that she is still getting to do some of the things that she always wanted to do, that, you know, if she had come out as a woman in her old life, maybe that wouldn't be true, but now she's a duchess, so she still gets to do things and people accept it.
Yeah, they don't,
Yeah,
like, go into any explanation as to, like, how it happens or why it's a possibility, but
yeah,
we are basically told that she gets to do the things that make her happy, even though she's not,
it's
you know,
unconventional.
like a
Yeah.
man.
But yeah, I don't know. I just really thought it was super great. I loved it.
A lot of fun. It did have a very, like, old school romance,
Oh yeah.
bonkers vibes, which like, of the premise and everything,
Yeah, for sure.
which you don't get to see that much in
Well, and
I feel
even at
like
the
there's a
end,
lot of,
like,
like, hyper
him
realism
thinking she
kind
was
of.
dead, that was a very, like, old school thing too. Like, that reminded me of, like, Perfect by Judith McNaught or whatever, where,
Mhm.
he thinks she's dead, and I was like, that so yeah, that the whole thing felt that way, and I loved it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I
we hope
did
you guys
come
enjoyed it
to
too.
romance through, like, old school historicals, and
Yeah,
so I definitely have a soft spot for a book that, like, does not shy away from doing stuff, like, you know what I mean?
yeah,
Just being like, "Yep, come with me, we're doing it."
yeah, for sure. Oh, we hope you guys had so much fun too. Stacy Reid has a huge backlist, so feel free to dig in anywhere you like. But yeah, this one was definitely a winner for us. And we'll see everybody in May.
You may.